Hey guys, it's me, your old friend Greg from Playtech, and as you may have guessed from what I'm wearing today, we're going to be looking at some of the new wireless mice from Steelseries. Now, Steelseries are some of the real OGs of the gaming industry. Not many people know this, but they literally invented the gaming mousepad. Yep, that's right, back in the days of the old roller ball mice, they actually created a product called the Ice Mat, which was a lightly textured glass mousepad, which at the time was total genius. The textured glass surface tracked accurately with rollerballs and didn't jam up your mouse with all the lint and other crap that a normal mousepad would. Why am I telling you this? Well, I guess I just wanted to illustrate that these guys have been doing this for a while, and they definitely know their stuff. Now, although I do think that we're about due for a ball mouse renaissance, the two mice we're looking at today are not roller ball mice. In fact, they don't even have cables. They're both wireless. So here they are, the Aerox 3 wireless and the Rival 3 wireless. Now, if I was taking them both at face value, I might just say, well, they're the same mouse, but one's got holes in it. And although I would be wrong, I could be forgiven for thinking that because they do share a number of things in common, which we'll talk about first, and then we'll move into how they differ. Firstly, they both have the same excellent shape. The arch on the top of these mice sits a little bit further forward than on some of their contemporaries, and it has a fairly pronounced downward arc at the rear. I find this makes these mice to be perhaps one of the best chassis shapes for claw grip and fingertip style users, which coincidentally is exactly my style. There are 6 programmable buttons on each mouse, your standard left and right, 2 side buttons, and a wheel click and your standard DPI switch, all of which are customizable. The mouse wheel has a nice amount of resistance to it, so it's firm and won't overshoot, but it's still light enough to flick between weapons with ease. The button positioning is excellent, especially the side buttons, which are easily accessible but are tucked in enough that you're not going to be accidentally bumping them. We all know how frustrating it is to be in the middle of something and you accidentally hit the side button, which triggers the back button in your browser or something like that and throws you out of what you were doing or what you were reading. You'd have to be pretty uncoordinated to do that with either of these mice. My only real criticism is it would have been interesting to see buttons on the opposite side like the Sensei, which would make this mouse a true ambidextrous mouse because it is fairly symmetrical otherwise, and I don't think that Steelseries currently have a wireless ambidextrous mouse, but maybe they'll surprise us later in the year with something else. Next up is the sensor. Both mice use the excellent TrueMove Air, which is an 18,000 CPI optical sensor designed in collaboration with PixArt. Now, you'll know how I feel about sensors if you've seen me talk about mice before. People will talk all day about the difference between the common mainstream optical sensors, but in this day and age, realistically speaking, these sensors are just incredibly accurate, and usually the only real-world practical difference that is actually noticeable outside of testing software would be things like liftoff distance, which even then you're only really likely to notice if you're reasonably hardcore. I guess what I'm trying to say is that this is a great sensor, but society has moved past the need for comparing sensors. If you're shopping for a gaming mouse these days, you probably have a pretty hard time to actually come up with something that wasn't reasonably amazing. I mean, up until recent years, there were some absolute shockers for acceleration and angle snapping, but these days most comparisons are purely academic. So, you know, rant over. Where were we? Anyway, this is a sensor that will track your movement impeccably. If you've ever seen anyone complain about accuracy with either of these things, they're literally lying to you and you should cut them out of your life because they're no good for you.
Does it spark joy?
Okay, one last thing that these two have in common before we diverge. Both the Rival 3 and the Aerox 3 have this nice matte sort of finish, which I think it isn't a coating, it actually seems to be the textured surface. What I really like about this is that it resists fingerprints really, really well. Now, this is where our path forks and our Rival 3 wireless goes one way and the Aerox 3 goes the other. Firstly, these mice both have different click switches. The Rival 3 wireless is rated for 60 million clicks, which is already a massive number, but the Aerox 3 is rated for 80 million. What's even more interesting is that they're IP54 switches that will resist dust and moisture. I'd say this is due to the next thing we'll talk about, which is the open chassis of the Aerox 3 wireless. Because it has all these crazy speed hole things in it, which make it lighter, they've also gone ahead and made all the internals IP54. If you look closely, you can see there's like kind of a glossy aqua barrier coating over the internal PCB and stuff. This keeps all the sweat and dust and stuff from interfering with the electronics, which is important considering this mouse is pretty much naked other than that. Nani? So how effective is it to turn the chassis into Swiss cheese with all these holes? Does it really make a difference? Yes, it turns out it makes a hell of a difference. The Aerox 3 weighs in at about 66 grams, give or take, but the Rival 3 sits at a full 106 grams, which is pretty middle of the road for a wireless mouse. However, an interesting feature of the Rival 3 is that you can actually remove one of the AAA batteries and run it off just a single one, which will put it in at about 96 grams, so save you about 10 grams, which is a noticeable weight reduction. You can actually feel that in use. Now, not everybody is crazy about lightweight, but if you are, the Aerox 3 is actually pretty impressive in how light it is. I've found that since I've been using it, when I switch back to a normal mouse, it kind of feels like one of those weird dreams where you're kind of dragging your feet in mud or something like that, and you're kind of struggling, or like when you jump on your friend's PlayStation or something like that, and it's locked at 30 FPS, and you feel like you're kind of just so sluggish and slow and stuff like that. That's sort of what it feels like going back to a normal mouse now. So when you switch to one of these super light mice, there is a little bit of a you kind of get locked into it for a little while. It takes a little bit of effort to go back. Now, anyway, that might be a little bit dramatic, but it kind of gives you an idea of how this ultralight mouse craze is kind of catching on, and how once you get used to that lack of resistance in your movement, it's kind of hard to go back. And actually, while we're talking about the Aerox 3 weight, I can kind of imagine that they might even be able to knock a few grams off this if they take out the plastic diffuser in the bottom, or they like lighten it up a little bit or something, maybe remove some of the mass on that, because there's got to be a solid couple grams in there, and that could probably even knock it into maybe being one of the lightest wireless mice ever, possibly. Steelseries, if you're listening, put it on the list.
Okay, let's see my to-do list.
Anyway, I'll let you decide on the pros and cons of an ultralight mouse or not. Let's get back to some of the differences between these two guys. So let's talk batteries again. So as I mentioned, the Rival 3 comes with two AAA batteries, which you can use one at a time or both at once. Both at once gives you a total playtime of over 400 hours. So I'm assuming that when you drop down to one, you'll probably get about 200 hours. Honestly, I don't think I'm even close to wearing this thing down yet, but I'll let you know when it runs out about how accurate that is. Now, the Aerox 3, on the other hand, has a lightweight lithium battery that lasts for about 80 hours on 2.4 gigahertz, or 200 hours on Bluetooth. Now, although that is less than the Rival 3, it is a rechargeable battery, and it's also a fast charge battery. So when you use the included USB-C cable, this means you can plug it in for 15 minutes, and it's going to give you about 40 hours of game time. So that's pretty impressive. That's very fast charge. Now, obviously, because it is a rechargeable lithium-ion battery in the Aerox 3, it also comes with a nice braided USB-C cable, and when it is plugged in, it does send the mouse data over the cable rather than wirelessly. I particularly like the Bluetooth on these mice because it allows you to connect to two devices at once, which is great if you're using it for a work mouse, but also gaming at home on your PC. You can switch between modes using the little switches on the bottom, which also allow you to turn it off as well. There's some pretty nice PTFE feet on the bottom of those. I actually kind of like the layout of the Rivals one better because it looks like a happy face, and sometimes when I get sad I just like to turn it over and look at it and just cheer myself up. Look. Anyway, the last thing I wanted to cover was the RGB lighting. The Rival 3 has a couple of LEDs in the scroll wheel, whereas the Aerox 3 has 3 separate lighting zones all in the body of the mouse, which can be configured using the Steelseries engine software, alongside all the other standard options like sensitivity and bindings. So that's a pretty comprehensive run through of these great new wireless mice from Steelseries. Now I'm going to fade out to some B-roll, and we're going to bring up some specs side by side for a recap. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.